You can grow your own groceries this fall and winter, but you have to plan ahead. And I get it. Right now your garden might be overflowing with tomatoes and zucchini, or it's extremely hot and muggy like it is here in my garden. I'm about ready to melt. And maybe you're still waiting on those summer harvests to come in. So the last thing you want is more to manage. But the truth is, if you wait until it feels like fall, it's already going to be too late. The window for planting high value fall crops is short, and some of the best money-saving crops need to be going in now or very soon depending on your location. So let's talk about how to time everything using your first frost date so that you can seamlessly start crops while your summer garden is still producing without the extra stress. You'll walk away with 5 small space-friendly crops that can shave at least $200 to $500 off your grocery bill this fall and winter, plus simple strategies to help them thrive through the late summer heat and keep producing long after the season changes. Here in my upstate South Carolina garden, where again it is extremely hot and muggy, I can literally hear thunder in the background from storms randomly popping up. I've been harvesting lettuce, garlic, herbs, zucchini, scallop squash, and bush beans, and I'm just about ready to start pulling out my corn, cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, and potatoes, and then followed by melons and winter squash. So it might look like my garden is overflowing, but with a few smart decisions, I can still tuck in my fall crops without overwhelm, and you can too. If you're ready to stop feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or stuck with your garden, I want to invite you to join me in my free training where I share the exact system I use to rebuild my garden from burnout and overwhelm to a small but mighty space that actually feeds my family. Whether you're short on time, space, or experience, this training will give you simple, actionable steps to grow the high-value food that you need without the stress or the guesswork. If you want to save money, eat better, and bring peace back to your gardening routine, click the link below so that we can build a garden that fits your life and nourishes your family together. Broccoli is hands down one of the most valuable cool season crops you can grow because it's so versatile and it's easy to preserve. It's one of those crops that mostly comes ready all at once, aside from the side shoots that come after the main head is harvested, but that actually makes it perfect for freezing. I like to steam it and then portion it out and freeze it for side dishes or to throw into soups, casseroles, and skillet meals all winter long. And by planting enough in the late summer, you can stretch your harvest right through the cold months, sometimes even until it's time to grow it again in the spring. Broccoli is one of those crops that adds up fast on your grocery bill, especially organic. A single head can run at least $2 to $4 at the store right now, and that doesn't even include the side shoots you'll get if you manage the plant well in your own garden. Depending on your space, you can grow enough to save at least $30 to $60 or more over the course of the fall and the winter. But there's a trick to growing broccoli successfully in the fall, and that's timing. When I first started, I kept reading that broccoli should be planted 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost date, so that's what I did. I planted in late September, thinking that the cooler weather would be perfect. But the plants didn't have enough time to form heads before the days got short, and they just sat there all winter, not dead, but not producing anything either. And then come spring, they'd finally start growing again, but they would bolt almost immediately because it gets hot so fast here. After a few rounds of trial and error, and it might take some of that for you too, depending on your microclimate, I realized that I needed to back things up a bit, and now I plant about 10 to 12 weeks before my first frost, really closer to 12. For me here in upstate South Carolina, that means direct sowing right around August 15th. And that simple shift has made all the difference. I've had full, beautiful broccoli heads ready just before Christmas, and then those plants produce side shoots as well. Broccoli is a cool season crop that matures best in cool weather, but it still needs warm soil to get going, and that's why it's so important to look at your first frost date and then count backwards. Most broccoli varieties need about 60 to 100 days from transplant to harvest, so if your first frost is around mid-November, that means transplanting by mid-August and not waiting until September. If you're starting your broccoli indoors, keep in mind that the days to maturity listed on the seed packet doesn't start until you transplant the seedling outdoors. So you'll need to add an extra 4 to 6 weeks on top of the 10 to 12 weeks before your average first frost to make sure the plants have enough time to mature. And in these time frames, we've added a couple extra weeks because plants grow slower the shorter the days get. I personally grow the Belstar variety, which handles both heat and cold really well, and it's been super reliable in my garden. But do your research because, as always, it helps to choose varieties that thrive in your location. You can space your plants about 12 to 18 inches apart, and if you're transplanting in hot weather, give them some temporary shade for a few days while they get established. And if you plant some in grow bags, they can be moved to cooler spots when needed. And of course, mulch well and water deeply, and then let the plants do their thing. One of the best parts of fall-grown broccoli is that pest pressure is so much lower than in the spring. You're also less likely to deal with bolting since the plants are maturing as temperatures cool down. And if you get a mild winter, the plants can often survive, with some varieties tolerating down to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The foliage might get a little bit roughed up, but the broccoli heads usually come through unscathed. After cold exposure, they even taste sweeter and more delicious. So if you've struggled with broccoli in the past, do not give up. Just shift the timing a bit and see what happens. And if you're wondering how to get these crops started during the heat of summer like this, stick around because at the end of this video, I'm sharing one of my favorite tricks to help you get better germination, even in the hottest weeks of the season. Carrots might seem like an odd crop to focus on, especially when they're cheap and pretty easy to find at the store. But if you've ever tasted a fresh one straight from your garden, you know that store-bought cannot even come close. And here's the thing, carrots aren't just about the root. The greens are edible too. And they make one of my favorite fall recipes, which is carrot top pesto that stretches your harvest even further. A solid planting of carrots in just one raised bed can yield $25 to $50 at least worth of fresh carrots, and even more when you can count the greens for pesto. Plus, when you store them in ground through the winter, you're stretching that value across multiple months without needing a fridge or a storage bin. And the key with carrots is planting early enough so that they mature in time. And just like broccoli, that window is probably earlier than you're thinking. I plant my carrots right around the same time as my broccoli, which is usually about mid-August, again here in South Carolina, and I always direct sow them because carrots don't really like being disturbed because their tap roots are pretty sensitive. To help with germination in the summer heat, I use the same special method I'm sharing at the end of this video, and it makes a huge difference. I also only plant a few seeds every few inches to cut down on seed waste and to save myself time while thinning later. One of my go-to varieties is Danvers because it's reliable, it does great in raised beds and containers, and it holds up well through fluctuating temperatures that we have here. After I pull my potatoes out of my grow bags, that's exactly where I'm going to be planting my carrots this year. Carrots are another cool season crop that needs time to mature before the days get short. And if you plant too late, the tops are going to grow fine, but the roots aren't going to size up. And once the daylight drops off, growth slows way down and the plants go dormant depending on your growing zone. In my experience, carrots that don't mature until spring tend to get tough and woody, and they're just not as good. So, like broccoli, timing is everything. You want them to reach maturity in the fall while there's still enough sun. Here's what works for me. I direct sow about 10 to 12 weeks before the first frost date, which is mid-August here in my zone 8, and I make sure to keep an eye on the days to maturity to get the timing right. You can choose a variety that fits your setup, like shorter varieties if you're working with shallower space in containers or raised beds. You can also sow sparingly, just a few seeds every few inches to reduce thinning work later on. You can use the method I'll show you at the end of this video to help them germinate evenly during hot weather. The beauty of fall carrots is that you don't have to harvest them all at once. You can leave them in the ground, which is nature's refrigerator, and harvest as needed as long as your soil isn't frozen solid. In colder zones, or if your soil does freeze solid, try growing them in deep grow bags that you can move to a more protected spot where they're not going to freeze solid. Here in South Carolina, the ground, believe it or not, freezes and thaws throughout the winter, so the plants go dormant and the tops die off, but the carrot roots don't become mushy if they're left in the ground, at least in my experience. And after some cold exposure, they get even sweeter and more delicious, just like broccoli. And remember, If you harvest some carrot tops while thinning or before winter sets in, they make a fresh, nutrient-packed pesto that adds serious value to your harvest. I thin my carrots when they're slightly on the bigger side, like baby carrots, so that I can eat the tiny carrots and the tops are big enough for me to make into a substantial amount of pesto that I can freeze. Next, let's talk about a group of plants that keep producing through fall and even winter in small spaces. When it comes to versatility, yield, and money saved at the store, herbs are easily one of the most valuable crops you can grow. They don't take up much space, they're incredibly productive, and once you start growing your own, it's hard to go back to those tiny plastic, expensive clamshells of often wilted herbs at the grocery store. Growing just a few of your own can easily save a couple $100s per season, especially if you use them regularly for cooking or for teas. And when you preserve them for winter, you're getting even more out of each harvest with little effort. I pack herbs into all kinds of small spaces, like raised beds, containers, and even grow bags, and they thrive. If you've got a sunny windowsill or a south-facing window in your home, some herbs can keep going indoors throughout the winter as well. One of my favorite things is tucking cold, hardy herbs like cilantro, parsley, and dill into the corners of my fall garden. They're so much easier to grow in the cooler months, and they don't bolt like they do in the summer. And they can handle light frost just fine if you give them a little bit of protection. There's actually a wide range of herbs that thrive in the fall and even into winter. Cold hardy ones like cilantro, parsley, and dill can be direct sown outdoors in late summer, and they're going to grow well into fall and can tolerate light frost. Perennial herbs like rosemary, lavender, and sage are woody and hardy enough to tolerate the cooler temperatures, and they may even stay evergreen in your area, giving you a few harvests through the winter. Most other perennial herbs will eventually go dormant, like chives, after a hard frost, but they're going to come back strong in the spring. And warm season ones like basil can be brought indoors before the first frost and kept going for several months, as long as they have plenty of light and they stay warm. A sunny windowsill can work, but a small grow light setup makes it even easier for the herbs to thrive through the dark months of winter. When you think about it, herbs are one of the easiest crops to preserve. You can use a dehydrator or the oven to dry them for cooking and tea blends. You can chop and freeze them in olive oil, ice cubes for soups and stews, or you can use them fresh while they're still abundant. You don't need much space at all. Even a few small containers can give you an ongoing supply of herbs that would cost a fortune at the store. If you want a simple way to grow high-value food this fall, even in a small space, I want to invite you to my free training where I'll show you exactly what you can grow in something as small as a 2 by 4 foot space, including a powerful little culinary and tea herb garden setup. My training is packed with simple, actionable steps to help you grow more with less space, less time, and way less stress. Click the link below to join me to build a garden that actually fits your life and feeds your family. Beets are one of the most high-value crops you can grow in a small space garden, since you get 2 harvests in one. The edible roots and the nutritious greens, and they're easy to grow, they're fast to mature, and they're compact enough to fit 9 plants per square foot. They're a great choice for home gardens because you get so much nutrition out of every inch of your space with beets. They're another grocery item that feels affordable until you're buying bunch after bunch, and a small garden bed can yield at least $30 to $70 worth of beets and greens, and when you count the nutritional value packed into each root and the greens, they're one of the most cost-effective crops you can grow. My go-to variety is Early Wonder Tall Top. The greens grow in fast and get tall enough for an early harvest, and then the roots size up nicely. They're probably around 4 inches in diameter. They do have that classic earthy beet flavor though. My kids love them roasted, and they actually will fight over them at dinner time, but raw, that's still a no for them. If you're not a big fan of the earthy taste of beets, try varieties like golden ones because they're sweeter and they might win you over if you think that you can't stand beets. I plant my beets at the same time as my broccoli and carrots, which is around mid-August, but varieties like Early Wonder give you a little bit more wiggle room because they mature quicker. Still though, timing is important because beets need to be nearly mature by the time daylight really drops off. If you plant too late, they're going to stall out before they size up. You can sow them sparsely or you can thin them early, and this helps the roots develop properly, especially in a small space. You can harvest the greens while the roots are still growing, but I would avoid cutting them all off at once because we need to leave enough for the plant to keep photosynthesizing so that the root can continue developing. One of the best parts about growing fall beets, just like carrots, is you don't have to pull them all at once. And as long as your ground doesn't freeze solid, you can harvest them through winter as needed. In colder zones, or if your soil does freeze solid, just like carrots, you can continue growing them in containers or grow bags, and then you can move them to a sheltered spot. Whether you love them or hate them, beets are one of the most efficient and nutritious crops that you can tuck into a small space this late summer to harvest in the fall and winter. Next up, let's talk about the salad bowl crops. These are leafy greens that give you continuous harvest all the way into winter. Lettuce, spinach, and I need to mention radishes. They're the definition of quick win crops. They grow fast, they don't take up much space, and with a little bit of planning, they can give you weeks of harvests deep into the colder months. And with grocery store prices for these items going through the roof, especially for anything organic, growing your own can easily save you $50 to $100 or more just in fall salads alone. Once my summer crops like tomatoes and squash are winding down, I clear out those beds and immediately start sowing my salad greens. I like to be able to keep the harvests going without adding more garden beds or stress. I succession plant lettuce every 1 to 2 weeks or so, and radishes every 7 to 10 days for a continuous supply, because I don't like to harvest everything at once and then be stuck buying it again later. But here's something that can trip us up. Once the days get much shorter in the late fall, even lettuce growth slows way down or it stops completely. So if you're planting seeds too close to that point, they may germinate just fine, but they're not really gonna grow very much. And that's why getting a few good rounds in earlier when there's still enough sunlight is so important. One thing I've noticed in the cooler months is that some varieties look totally different. I planted a purple lettuce one time that stayed green under my portable hoop house because the sun is so much less intense in the fall and the winter that the lettuce wasn't the vibrant purple that it is in the spring and the summertime. For a strong salad crop harvest, the key is understanding timing, temperature, and light. You can sow lettuce and spinach 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost date, and radishes can go in even closer to the frost date thanks to their quick maturity. If you're thinking about planting spinach, I have to mention that I've had better results starting at around 8 weeks before my frost date, and then planting a few rows again at 6 weeks since the weather can vary in my location. Both lettuce and spinach need cooler soil in order to germinate, because anything above 85 degrees will cause germination to drop off fast. An option to offset this would be to use mulch, shade cloth, or to start seeds indoors and then transplant later to protect from extreme heat. Then shifting to cold frames or frost blankets or row covers, these can stretch your harvest well into the winter, especially in milder zones. Even in colder zones though, these covers can still add several weeks to your harvest window, especially for tender lettuce leaves. Spinach is incredibly hardy, even when it's uncovered, and it often survives winter and then regrows in early spring for more harvests. Even a few short rows of lettuce, spinach, and radishes can save you $3 to $5 per harvest. Multiply that by several weeks of succession planting, and you're looking at $75 to $100 at least of fresh greens and roots grown in space that most people will write off at the end of the summer. If you've ever tried to sow any of these crops in late summer and have gotten poor germination, don't worry, you're not alone. Here's a simple method that makes a big difference in getting seeds to sprout more reliably during summer heat and unpredictable weather. I started using this method after one too many seedlings got either baked in dry soil or washed away by a thunderstorm. Now I use it every time I direct sow fall crops like carrots, spinach, or lettuce. It's really a simple step, but it makes a huge difference, especially when temperatures are high and your soil dries out quickly between waterings. Here's how it works. After sowing your seeds, water the garden bed thoroughly and then place a flat board or a 2x4 or even something like cardboard or burlap directly on top of the soil. When you water, you can do so right over the board, and that helps lock in moisture and it helps keep the soil surface cooler. I always use untreated wood just because I'm worried about chemicals leaching into the soil. You can check once a day for germination, because once you see the first signs of sprouting, you'll need to remove the board so that the seedlings can get sunlight in order to photosynthesize and grow. This method helps in 3 big ways. It keeps the soil moist, which is critical for germination. It shields the tiny seeds from torrential rain or wind that could displace them. And it regulates temperature, giving your seeds a stable microclimate to sprout, even during extreme late summer weather conditions. So if you've struggled to get fall crops going in the past, this is one small shift that can make a big impact. I hope this video gave you some clarity and confidence about what to plant for a high-value fall garden, and more importantly, when to plant it so you can actually enjoy those harvests when it counts. Remember, it's not about doing more or managing a bigger garden. It's about making smart choices with the space and time you have, and then setting yourself up to grow food that's fresh, useful, and saves you money through the colder months. And if you're ready to take the next step, I'd love for you to join me in my free training. I'll show you the exact system I used to go from burnout and overwhelm to a garden that actually fits my life and feeds my family. Whether you've got 20 minutes a day or just a few containers on a patio, you can absolutely do this, and I will help you get there. Click the link below and I'll see you there. And if you found this video helpful, please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments which of these crops you're most excited to grow this fall. Thanks for watching.